Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for joining. My name is Leanne Fullahan, and I am Education Director here at the People's Forum, and I also co-edit the project 1804 Books. I'm very excited to be joined here with my comrade Sudhanva. Hello, Sudhanva, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, Leanne. Thanks very much. Hello, my name is Sudhanva Deshpande. I'm based in New Delhi. I'm the managing editor of Leftword Books. And I'm very proud of our very long association with Dr. T.M. Thomas Isaac and Richard Franke. We had first published their book on people's planning, local development and democracy back in 2001. And now we have this newer, fuller, more comprehensive edition that's out, and that's going to be what this discussion is going to be around. But before we get to that, Leanne, would you like to talk about the association between 1804 and Leftword?
Yes, great. So we are very happy to be collaborating closely with Leftword Books. 1804 Books is a new project. We are based out of the People's Forum, which is a political education center in New York City. And we have just opened a bookstore where you can find essential texts of socialist literature, many texts that have been produced by Leftword, which are harder for folks to get here in the North American region. So you can visit 1804 Books if you would like to read books like People's Planning and the many other fantastic texts that have been produced by Leftword Books. And we've also begun working on collaborating on producing texts together. So we have, for example, the Peter Merton's book, They Have Forgotten Us, which is a recent publication. And Sudhanva, would you like to add anything?
Well, just to say that at Leftword, we are delighted at the fact that 1804 and Leftword are coming together in these very exciting ways. For us, it's really wonderful to have a place in New York which would, showcase our books, where readers can go and browse the books and pick up whatever they want, of course, from Leftword, but also a range of other radical publishers from around the world. And I can tell you, I've been to the People's Forum a few times. Myself, I can tell you it's one of the most exciting places to visit if you are in New York. But also, if you're not in New York, you can still visit the 1804 website, and you can see the whole range of books that they have. And they are happy to ship books all over America, all over the Americas, as well as the rest of the world, as indeed does the Leftword website. So we are very excited and enthused by this sort of horizontal collaboration between 1804 and Leftword, which we hope will get to readers and activists and militants across the world a whole range of new titles, either independently from 1804 or Leftword, or jointly, as indeed this book is a joint publication. So with that, I just need to make another quick announcement, which is to say that we are very sorry to say that Comrade Arya Rajendran, who's the mayor of the Thiruvananthapuram municipality, she's probably the youngest mayor in the world of a major city. She was going to join us, but unfortunately she can't because she's taken unwell and she's in hospital. We hope it's nothing serious, it's nothing, but from hospital it's impossible for her to join us. So I'm afraid that she won't be with us, but we do have Subin Dennis and Leanne. Over to you.
Sure. I will introduce Subin Dennis, who will be moderating this event, and then he will bring us into the discussion. So Subin is an economist and an activist based in New Delhi. He hails from Kerala, and he holds a master's in philosophy and economics from Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi. He was active with the student movement and served as the Delhi State Vice President of the Students' Federation of India. And his writings in English and Malayalam on issues related to economy and politics appear in various periodicals and websites. He's also worked with the online news portal NewsClick as a writer before joining Tricontinental Institute for Social Research. Thanks, Subin, so much for joining us. It's great to have you, and it's over to you.
Thank you, Lion and Suthanva, for the introductions. And thank you very much to Leftword Books and 1804 Books for organizing this event. We have an absolutely brilliant panel of speakers here, especially on this topic. But before introducing the speakers, for the sake of the international audience, let me give a very brief introduction to Kerala as a background to what we'll be discussing today. Kerala is a state in the southern part of India. Keralites often think of their state as small, but its population of 35 million is higher than that of 150 countries of the world. The state of Kerala was formed in 1956, and in the very first elections held in 1957, the Communist Party of India came to power. Among the major measures it undertook were sweeping land reforms and educational reforms. The elite in the state, of course, didn't like that, and they began an agitation against the government. The CIA was also involved. In response, in 1959, India's central government or federal government dismissed the communist ministry. The communists have been in and out of power since then in Kerala in the subsequent decades. At present, there is a communist-led government in power in Kerala, the Left Democratic Front government. The Left Democratic Front, or LDF, is an alliance which is led by the Communist Party of India, Marxist. The LDF was re-elected for a second consecutive term in elections held this year. Primarily as a result of measures taken by the communist-led governments and the struggles led by the communist-led working class and peasant movements, Kerala has made spectacular gains in education and healthcare. Kerala has India's highest literacy, lowest infant mortality, and the highest life expectancy. Land reforms smashed the dominance of the landlords in the countryside and redistributed land, mainly to tenant farmers and to a limited extent, agricultural workers. Workers' movements have strengthened workers' rights. Kerala today has the highest wage rates in India and the most wide-ranging set of social security measures for workers. Most of these had been achieved already before Kerala embarked on people's planning, which is perhaps one of the most sweeping initiatives of democratic decentralization anywhere in the world. It was introduced in August 1996. Therefore, this month it turns 25 years old. It is in this context that we are having this discussion on the book People's Planning, Kerala, Local Democracy and Development, published in April this year by Leftword Books. It is actually a revised and expanded edition of an earlier book by the same authors, Dr. Thomas Isaac and Richard Franke, as Comrade Suthanva has already mentioned. I'll leave it to Dr. Isaac to explain what people's planning is, but since it concerns local governments in India, perhaps our viewers from abroad might need to be familiar with some of the terms that we might be using in this discussion. These are concerning the elected local governments. In villages, the smallest elected body is the village panchayat or village council. Above village panchayats, we have block panchayats, and above block panchayats, we have district panchayats or district councils. Kerala has 14 districts. For urban areas, we have municipalities and municipal corporations. Municipalities for smaller towns and municipal corporations for bigger cities. We have a stellar set of speakers today. Of course, it's tough to find speakers who are better suited than them to talk about people's planning. Dr. T.M. Thomas Isaac is a member of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of India Marxist, or CPIM. He has served as Kerala's finance minister twice, that is for 10 years. He is a trained economist who was previously professor at the Center for Development Studies in Thiruvananthapuram, Kerala. He has written numerous academic papers and books, and he is among the pioneers of people's planning. He was in charge of People's Plan campaign when he was a member of the Kerala State Planning Board from 1996 to 2001. Professor Richard Franke is Professor Emeritus of Anthropology at Montclair State University in the US. He has written extensively on Kerala, including 5 books on the state, starting with Life is a Little Better, Redistribution as a Development Strategy in Nadur Village, Kerala. He has been a long-time collaborator with Dr. Thomas Isaac. We had a third speaker, of course, Arya Rajendran, who is the mayor of the Municipal Corporation of Thiruvananthapuram. She is a member of the Communist Party of India Marxist and was elected mayor in December 2020 at the age of 21, making her the youngest mayor in the country. But as Comrade Suthanva has already mentioned, she has taken ill and has been hospitalized, so she won't be able to join us today, unfortunately. So without further ado, I think let's get on with our discussion. I would like to inform our viewers that they are free to ask questions in the chat box wherever you are watching this, in Facebook or YouTube, wherever it is. And we'll try to select a few of those questions and put them before our speakers today. So getting on with the discussion, perhaps we could start with the very basics. So, Comrade Thomas Isaac, why is planning necessary? What is the importance of economic planning in the first place? India had a planning commission, but the central government abolished it. But Kerala continues to have a Kerala State Planning Board. Why is that? And what was or what is the need for decentralized planning? Comrade, your mic is muted. Okay.
Yeah, planning has become really unfashionable. But the national movement period, everyone, including the big businesses houses in India, were agreed upon. Since resources are very scarce, they must be planned, how the investment must be made. In fact, the biggest business houses produced what is called as Bombay Plan, which outlined what future independent India should be, where they gave central role to planning. But now the whole policy regime world over has changed, and India has formally ditched planning. But we in Kerala are slightly different. We want to have certain alternative policies. So this is one point that we are not going to give up. In our state, we will continue to plan. So there is a state planning board, and more than that, we made planning the central fulcrum around which democratic decentralization would evolve in Kerala. See. Now, the people, they have redistribution of land. So they are owners of means of production to a great extent within the countryside. Small scale industries, they own the small factories and so on. They should get together and plan how their agriculture should be, their industry should be, how the school and hospital should function. Is manageable. They are planning their village, their own life. So they're taking command of their life. There's a big evocative appeal also. And therefore we decided, though India ditched planning, decentralized planning would be the central theme of our devolution program. So that's why, not market. If you look at the World Bank report for 2002, in fact, the chapter dealing with devolution, it is titled Making Market-Friendly Institutions. You see. It's a very different concept of devolution and decentralization. So we have always emphasized our devolution is going to revolve around planning, which simply means people collectively decide their priorities and decide what to do.
So could you walk us through the basics of people's planning? How is it done?
Very well. The basic structure was since 1996 when we started has remained the same. It is in fact very similar to what happens in participatory budgeting in Latin American countries, but there are certain differences. One, need identification. What should be done? Everybody has a right to participate and say what their needs are. So it's done in village assemblies where everybody has the right to participate. And then those needs from the various village assemblies, because Kerala villages are very large, not one assembly. Every ward has an assembly separate. Therefore, they have to be collected together needs and prioritized. Therefore, representatives, the village assemblies gather along with some experts, and they would prioritize, which is written up into project proposals, which ensures there is certain deliberative thinking, deliberation going on in the making of the projects, and written up into formal project proposals, because that ensures transparency. And then the local elected representative finally make it into a plan. So it has different stages. At the lower stage, everybody is the right to participate. Then the design involves a large number of micro forums where, according to your capacity and capability, you can choose to participate or get selected to participate. Find some writing about the projects, everybody can't. But Kerala is a very literate society, technical people. Therefore, those who want, they can volunteer to be part of the task forces to write up projects, and so on. And then there is one thing. It is here that Kerala program differs from Latin American, say, participatory budgeting. In Kerala, the participation continues into the implementation phase, not just decision-making process. Decision is made collectively, then implementation is done through popular committees along with officials and so on. For some hospitals would have hospital development committee, schools have parent-teacher associations, then micro enterprises, they have their own cooperative or associations or self-help groups. We encourage as many number of micro forums as these, both in planning and implementation, so that people can take an active interest in it.
It's an amazing story, actually, that you have, both of you have put down in your amazing book. And when you describe the processes involved, especially the training and so on, you realize how difficult it actually is to train people, to enable them to plan for themselves. It's actually those sections are frightening. When I read those, it appears as if it's so difficult. How did you manage to motivate people to do this?
I am an insider to the movement. I have been it right from the start. And therefore, I know the problems and so on. We have been extremely frank. In fact, I don't think we could have been more self-critical than our narrative in the book. And Richard Franke has been somebody from outside. Therefore, we get both the viewpoints from inside as well as somebody outside critically examining it. And that is the nature of the book. We have not tried to hide up, we do window dressing. Every problem that we have faced, we have tried to put down. And looking back, reading it after many years, I also get to, how do we do this? Because you are setting in motion without any prior experience. You are committed 40% of your plan expenditure to a program. And then you are involving 2 million people in the ward assemblies, about 200,000 persons attending the development seminars, more than 100,000 persons getting to the write-up projects and so on, another 10,000 technical volunteers. See, we gave a big advertisement newspaper. If you're past the age of 58, we retire at the age of 58 because there is unemployment and so on. And you happen to see this advertisement, well, remember, this may be the beginning of a new life for you. The state, Kerala wants you. Come and join. So you may be surprised. about 3 vice chancellors, 1 major general, about 20 chief engineers, and so on, railway board chairman, ex-railway board chairman. Normally, expertise that is available only at national, state level was made available to the local governments, you see. So this was a huge training program. I think Dick has been the one who has been totally impressed with the training program, that when we revised this book, he in fact wanted to have a section to deal with how we have institutionalized training, because he thought this was the most important thing. In fact, before Dick speaks, just one more point. When we compare with the Latin American experience, of course, there is training, but of officials only. The participants are not given orientation or training. But in the state of Kerala, no. As I told you, at the local level, the resource persons would number 50,000. 50,000, no, nearly 100,000 local resource persons. And they were all given training through cascading training from top to bottom, state level, district level, local level, not once, but 6 times within a year. And there's a huge chain of events set in motion. Dick, would you like to comment on this training program? You have been attending some of them.
Yes, sure. I think one way to think about this is to use the conceptual framework suggested by the American sociologist Eric Olin Wright and his colleague R. Kun Feng, who suggested the concept of empowered deliberative democracy. Lots of words like democracy are thrown around all the time, but this one I think is actually useful. And the idea is that the people who are participating in the planning process can actually make a difference in their lives. And this is achieved partly through having so much of the resources, the 40% of the development budget, transferred over to the lower levels. So when people go to these meetings, these planning meetings, they can actually talk about something that would be really useful. And that's the first part of it. What's the difference between, and that's the empowered part. And then we have the deliberative part, which means that instead of just coming to a meeting to represent an interest group, you come to the meeting to solve problems. And this is a whole different type of democracy that they're striving to institutionalize in Kerala. And it's one that makes it possible to break through the kind of traditional process, which is sometimes used with characterized by the term capture. In fact, I think K.N. Harilal, one of the activists who has worked on this problem, suggested that there's a kind of natural tendency for upper levels of the bureaucracy to capture whatever people are doing in their own village level. And so you have to figure out ways to make structures and processes that tend to prevent that. And this is partly where training comes in. Instead of just saying to people, get together and talk about your issues, you have to have some kind of a format in advance. You don't want to have too much control, because then you don't really have people's planning. You have planning by whoever is in charge of the process. But at the same time, you have to have something. So the lower level activists had materials developed for them that would help them to lead discussions, and in a way to constantly suggest alternatives, so that you don't just sort of repeat well-known phrases over and over. it's a gigantic challenge. And what's so impressive about Kerala is that they made it work on a huge scale, and then they made it work again, and again. So this is one of the reasons that I think Kerala is looked at by so many people, including even World Bank economists who are impressed with the achievements.
Professor Franke, could you also talk about some of the experiments of democratic decentralization that you have mentioned about in the book from other parts of the world? What are the similarities or dissimilarities with Kerala that they have?
Well, I think the one that is the closest match is the people's budgeting, the participatory budgeting in Brazil. This was initiated by the Brazilian Workers' Party when they came to power in several of the states and communities in Brazil in the late 1980s and early 1990s. And they would hold local assemblies also. Certain amount of the budget would be set aside for these assemblies, and they had a complicated process through which different proposals would be made, and then they would be sent out to committee groups, somewhat like what happens in Kerala by having the development seminar, which tries to collect and synthesize the suggestions, the felt needs of the people that are expressed in the earlier versions, the first meetings. I think the Brazilian case has been mildly successful. And interestingly enough, there was originally no contact between people in Kerala or Brazil. I think these two procedures were invented parallel and simultaneously.
Well, that is an interesting observation you have mentioned in the book also, that the planners in Kerala did not have much idea about what was happening elsewhere in the world. So that brings us to the question, where did this idea come from? Who were behind this idea? Where did this come from? Perhaps Comrade Thomas Isaac could talk about it.
Yeah. Many people are surprised that the Communist Party has been always in favor of democratic decentralization. Its concept of democratic centralization is something that is related to our party structure, which we voluntarily accept, but not to governance system. There our ideal is democratic decentralization. In fact, the first article of Comrade EMS, who was the former General Secretary and first Chief Minister of Kerala, he wrote this article in 1938, demanding greater powers for local governments. And since then, this was part of the left political agenda, something which we couldn't achieve, realize, though because the 1957 government had put it forward, but the government was dismissed because of what Subin has already discussed, the kind of struggle against it and dismissal. So finally, after 40 years, we put out a program to realize that. But that could become a practical, this political ideal could become a practical agenda, because a whole lot of civil society actors have been experimenting at local level development in various ways, various local level experiments, not only civil society organizations, individuals, departments, and therefore how to do it, the nitty-gritty of it was already evolved in a large way. So this is the second stream. And third, I would call would be the academics in Kerala. Major figures among them like Dr. K. N. Raj, Professor Gulati, and so on. In fact, I used to teach at Center for Developer Studies, and when it was established in 1975, 73, this first working paper was on planning from below. So that's a very intellectual support for the theme. And finally, there were Kerala government machinery is not like the government machinery in many states or countries, something which Eric Colin Wright has written extensively. It is more considerate to popular will and interest. And therefore, there is always a band of bureaucrats who have taken a people position and who have contributed significantly to making this happen. So what I say is that though it's a political project to the left, democratization, which is and an ideal for the future society that is going to emerge, but the platform, the design of local planning and decentralization is broad enough to accommodate a variety of thinking, a contribution from various types of people. That is what I think the greatest achievement of 25 years. If you ask me, Timmy, in one word, one sentence, what is the greatest achievement? Now, I can say about what happened in education, healthcare, roads, shelter, and so on. But I say the greatest achievement here has been creation of a democratic space at the local level, where individual citizens and organizations can intervene in the local development process. That democratic space has been created. You don't have to go to the capital city or organize state level struggle and so on. You can intervene at the local level. And that's the meaning of widening and deepening democracy, so that people can directly participate in the decision making and implementation. So this is it's a left project, but it's a broad enough to include everyone, even those who are totally anti-left. Because the governments are protected. In fact, the greatest credit of People's Plan campaign is it has survived 5 changes in the governments in Kerala. I don't think there is any other. In fact, that's what Dick would have always said. Nothing similar has happened anywhere here. And this has been made possible because of a popular movement. The decentralization was not something reform from above, but a demand from below, generated by a mass movement, people mobilized from the planning process, cutting across political divide. Everybody is involved, and therefore it generated a political will to sustain the decentralization even when the left is out of power. Neither left or anybody, nobody in Kerala can think of tampering with local government. They are as much a reality as the state government.
So, perhaps there is an interesting dialectic there. You say that the pressure for this came from below, but then the ideas came from the top. The theory of the Communist Party flows from the top to the bottom, right? So, I mean, it's an interesting dialectic there.
Right. So there is something definitely devolution by its very nature means power is at the top, you have to devolve it down. Now you can do it in 2 ways. Totally bureaucratic way, you make a law, the supreme lawgiver makes the law, and then things change downward. You can do it another way. Because this is a fundamental break in the system. As EMS has said, this is the greatest thing to happen in Kerala after land reforms. And though it is that fundamental, and his argument was, land reforms involved so many decades of mass mobilization. So we should have a big mobilization of masses for this fundamental reform to take place. And you get institutionalized. And for that, you need a movement from below. You have to mobilize people. People can't be mobilized by GOs, government orders from above. So we have a process of planning in large sections of people involved. Then planning itself becomes a movement. And so there's a demand from below. So the dialectics of, say, let's put synergy from the top and below getting together. Yeah.
So when we talk about what made this possible in Kerala, so I was looking at Professor Franke's old book, perhaps the first book that he wrote on Kerala. So I found these lines. One consequence of the redistribution movements is difficult to quantify, but perhaps of great importance for the next stage. We are referring to the awakened political consciousness of Kerala's workers and peasants, of their access to ideas, experiences, and organizations with the potential to graft onto the redistribution movements new programs to enhance people's lives. So, Professor Franke, would you like to comment on that? Did you see this coming when you were writing these lines?
I'm not sure I saw it coming, but I think one of the things that happens when people participate and the participation leads to some positive outcomes, the next time they call for assemblies, you're likely to go. So a lot of it is a back and forth kind of experience, assimilating that experience and using it for the next round. I think one of the things that happened in Kerala that's interesting from an outsider's perspective is that by around the 1980s, when I first went to Kerala, it had become clear, talking to various people from Integrated Rural Technology Center and the Center for Development Studies and other places, that the tremendously important reforms like the land reform, the improvements in health benefits and agricultural labor or pensions and so forth, this had all happened. And in a way, the people's planning became the follow-up that grew out of the intellectuals experiencing these many decades of movements and constantly trying to evaluate them and see how can we go forward to the next step.
Yeah, in fact, after Franke had finished his book, Nadu Village Study, we identified a number of very interesting, innovative development experiments in Kerala, and we agreed we'll write a book on that. But then the first case study we took was about a workers' cooperative, Kerala Dinispedi Cooperative, and that case study turned out to be a book by itself. Cornell published it. So then we decided, no, we'll take an elaborate way. We'll put them all together into one single book, New Churnings in Kerala. While we were thinking and debating on this, the People's Plan campaign was launched. Whole scenario changed. There's no point in visiting these small-scale enterprises or small-scale experiments. The whole Kerala was on the move. That's how we began to collaborate. Okay, here is something that going on, and in which, though Franke is not in Kerala, something which we had started. So we'll continue this collaboration into a book. And that's how in 2001, the first edition of this book came out.
I have many more questions, but then we are receiving many questions from our viewers. Shall we take some of them? First question is from Saumalya Das. Is this kind of planning process present in other states of India?
No. See, West Bengal had experimented with local planning. Karnataka did, but in both places it was largely at the district level. Never in India, in any state, a planning process starting from grassroots level has taken place. In fact, I was a member of a high-level commission headed by Manishankar Iyer, where we explored the possibility of replicating this Kerala experience in other states. We find we brought out a large menu of choices that can be made depending upon your local conditions in the state, how planning can be initiated. But I must say that it does not exist in any other state now.
In the book, you mentioned Karnataka. What happened there?
Karnataka, under the Janata government, Hedge was the chief minister, and the local administration minister was totally devoted to decentralization. And therefore, they are sharing one of the most radical devolution program at that time, district level planning and so. But then after Janata government fell, well, it got disrupted. But still, after Kerala, I would say Karnataka still has the best local government system in India.
Okay, so we have another question from Juliana Julie Barnett. Can you comment on the people's budgeting process that happened during the New Jewel movement in Grenada during the brief period it was in power?
Where in which
Grenada. New Jewel movement.
No, I do not know.
Okay.
I do not know. I mean, I have Franke. Do you know about that? New Jewel
No, I'm
movement?
sorry to say I'm not familiar with what, I mean, the New Jewel movement was only in power for a very brief period, and I don't know if anyone has written anything about it.
For the purpose of this book, we have added a new chapter where we have very extensively tried to refer to Latin American participatory budgeting, how the similarities. In fact, we were prompted by Martha Hanerka. She was a Venezuelan activist, writer, scholar, and she wanted to have a synthesis of Latin American experience in Kerala and to be a basic component of the vision of a 21st century socialism by Chavez. Well, she passed away, and the situation in Venezuela has also changed. So I don't know what's now. What is the condition there? Subin.
Okay. For viewers who are joining us midway, I would like to add that Arya Rajendran, who was supposed to be our third speaker, has not been able to join because she has taken ill and has been hospitalized. So continuing with questions from the viewers. Now there is a critical question from Sudeep Srestha. He happens to be my classmate from JNU. Why the left movements in Kerala succeeded and in the rest of India, especially in West Bengal, it failed? Is that because of not good planning, or is it something else?
It's too complex. We ourselves are not fully analyzed what has happened. So I don't want to comment on that. I will definitely say what happened in Kerala. But in West Bengal, we are having serious introspection. Why? What went wrong? Why our mass base has been eroded in this manner? So in fact, the party central committee is meeting. This is one of the themes that we are discussing. But, you know, the victory of the left in Kerala in this election has given rise to high expectations about the future. In the sense, I think a continuity of the government for another 5 years gives us an opportunity to complete certain important initiatives we have already started, which we think would make Kerala a very credible alternative within India, will attract more attention to the left alternative in India.
Okay, so there is a question from M Block, the user M Block. Can you discuss the relationship of the People's Plan campaign and local movement building? To what extent have movements been involved in creating or sustaining local self-governments? And how have local self-governments contributed to local movement capacities?
Yeah, in fact, this theme that you have raised is something very important in the discussion by E.M.S. Namboodiripad. He was asked, why do you communists want to have local governments? His answer was, well, the parliamentary system has given certain rights, fundamental rights of association, freedom of speech and belief and so on, which are very important for us in our mass mobilization. So extending these rights and procedures, democracy to the local level would enable us to mobilize people better. That was simple political response. Therefore, for him, participation is not individuals participating. Of course, every citizen has a right to participate. But his great hope was that Kerala, everybody is organized. Therefore, their organizations will get involved in the local level planning. And that is the guarantee why the participation would be sustained. Because, individuals, you can suffer after some time from campaign fatigue. Okay, you have been working, campaigning and so on. So after some time, individual may want to withdraw into some quietness and so on. But then this won't happen with a movement. Movement is something organic, continues to exist. Therefore, the sustainability of participation, his argument, EMS argument, is ensured only through getting the organizations to be involved in the planning process. Well, I must self-critically accept that this has not been up to the mark. This is one of the major issues that we shall take up as we move into the second quarter.
Perhaps I could return to one of my own questions here. Improving material production, increasing material production was has been one of the focus areas for people's planning. But how successful has that been? Has it led to more production actually?
The decentralization has tremendously improved the delivery of services. You can sense that the way Kerala has responded to COVID or the natural disasters. The decentralization was superb in asset creation, roads, housing, and so on. But when it came to the material production sector, well, it has found inadequate. Not decentralization, but the way we did the planning and so on in the agricultural and small-scale industrial sectors. But even the changes are very visible. In fact, one of the biggest successes of the last left government was in the agricultural production, not in the commercial crops whose prices are falling and so on, but in say vegetable cultivation and so on. There's been a tremendous upward movement, a very significant increase in the production. Now, we have put forward a slogan that every local government create or generate at least 5 employment opportunities for every 1,000 person in the population. So it's a kind of like old-time Chinese town and country enterprises centered around the local governments in Kerala. And this, I think, is going to give a new thrust to interventional local governments in the material production sectors.
Indeed. Professor Franke, perhaps we could ask Professor Franke about his own experiences. I mean, you have been in Kerala for for a really long time, researching and writing and so on. So I think many of our viewers will be interested in knowing what drew you to Kerala. How did you end up
Sure.
working on Kerala?
But first, let me just a quick addition to what Dr. Isaac said a few minutes ago about vegetable production. That was also based upon one of these alternative experiments that were going on in the late 1980s and 90s, and particularly in one village, Kanjikuri, where they did all kinds of participatory activities to see if they could increase vegetable production. And it was spectacularly successful. And then through the People's Campaign, one element has been holding events, development seminars that involve people from different communities sharing their experiences with each other and learning from each other. And that's one of the components of the spectacular increase in vegetable production. So I had been working in the 1970s in Indonesia on the Green Revolution, and then did other research on economic development in the third world. And all the examples that kept coming up were essentially of failures. And especially the 1980s was a very disastrous decade for most people around the world. And I was looking for some kind of a positive case study. And I sort of accidentally came across some articles about Kerala, and that's how it all got started. So Kerala has not disappointed me all these decades.
If you had to tell us one or two instances or one or two most inspiring stories from Kerala, including from the People's Plan campaign, what would those be?
Well, I think I was one Sunday afternoon in the Mararikulam area in central Kerala. I attended a meeting of one of the women's self-help groups, a neighborhood self-help group. And everything that happened was very ordinary. I mean, people got together. Some people were watching other people's children. There was an agenda. There was a discussion about possibly starting a cooperative to make umbrellas or school uniforms. And it was very typical, but in a way it was inspiring because it showed ordinary people doing things where they could take control of some parts of their lives, get assistance from local cooperative banks, and raise the income of the lowest income female-headed households, which had been targeted in this project, and try to push them above the poverty line. And I think as I was watching this very ordinary meeting of people speaking to each other and trying to develop how would this most effectively happen, not all the ideas suggested were very good, but the whole process was very inspiring.
Yes, so ordinary people collectively ending up doing extraordinary things.
Yeah, Dick did his research in Nadu. It's a village in Trichu district. Now, for writing this new edition, we went to this village. I hid it and saw the president. And the book opens with a narrative of her experience in planning, how a novice young woman, she became the president, and that too from the backward caste community, and how she grew with the movement. And there can be so many innumerable studies or statements on this personal experience of people who feel that this participation, involvement, what the hierarchy calls protagonism, improves yourself. You become a better citizen. Okay. You become a better human being. See, that's why this experience is not how many houses built, how many roads built, and so on. That material outcome is important. But this process also makes you, in a sense, a better citizens.
That reminds us that one of the most significant impacts that people's planning has had, or democratic decentralization has had on Kerala society, has been how it has been able to draw in women more into political activism, into planning, into government, into even material production, and so on. Could you talk about that? It would have been something that perhaps Arya Rajendran, if she was here, could have pitched in a bit, but could you talk about that a bit, and how Kudumbashree grew out of it, and so on?
Well, you are touching a very sore point. And this is one aspect I would be very embarrassed about. Though the conditions of women in terms of education, healthcare, their dress, consumption, and so on are much better than the rest of India. When it comes to the status of women, the position in society vis-a-vis men is as backward as anywhere else. Now, this is one issue we have to go to address. So we thought that decentralization would create local space where women activists and organizers can intervene to improve the conditions. And we have been working on that. For the first time, I would say in India, gender budgeting started with local planning. There is a women's component, and gender impact of the programs have to be assessed also. And it was a very important objective of the campaign. And therefore, we designed the self-help group movement, microfinance, which is normal anywhere in the rest of India and also the states. But microfinance movement in Kerala is very different to start with. It is not self-help group. Self-help group has an ideology. There's nobody to help you. Only you can help yourself and so on. No, none of that. It's a neighborhood group. Every household in the neighborhood can be represented by a woman if they choose, irrespective of caste, political party, and so on. The neighborhoodness is a criteria, so nobody is excluded. Then it is sponsored by the local government, not by NGO and so on and so forth. And third, it provides a platform of convergence on local governments, so anti-poverty program, state government program, everything is implemented through this platform. And then it also attempts to create, therefore, employment, income generating activities. And finally, this has been visualized as an instrument of women empowerment. And if you ask me, has it transformed Kerala? No, I wouldn't claim. I told you it's still an embarrassment, gender when it comes to Kerala. And therefore, we have decided to do something which I think will be directly addressing this violence against women and so on. We are going to do crime mapping. That's a women collectives in small groups, Kudumbashree self-help group. They would identify through the recalling, say in the last 3 months, what were the kind of crimes they faced, sexual violence they faced, whole variety of them, when, what place, by whom. And then local government will have to make projects which will address this type of crime. Maybe that area is dark up to evening and therefore it's not safe. Okay, put street light there. Okay, one particular area, there is a lot of domestic violence. You have a counselor going there. So on and so forth, you can, projects. And this is called the crime mapping program. So we have not succeeded there, but Kudumbashree has been a major step. More than 200,000 women are organized in this movement. and this is going to be a major program. So we have created a social organizational basis to launch one of the most interesting gender experiments in the country, I would say. I am an optimist, but I would never claim that we have addressed it and solved it. No.
So here is an interesting question from Prasanna Venkatesh. How are conflicts resolved in local meetings? Local, probably he means local panchayat meetings. Clearly, there will be conflict of interest given people across the political and social spectrums involved.
See, at the local level, these conflicts come down. At the state level, in Kerala is a very fragmented society, fractured society by political, very fierce contesting. But we have designed the local governments in Kerala in such a manner, starting from the standing councils, everybody is given proportional representation. The opposition has also standing committee, so that everybody is involved in that thing. There is a due process where nobody can be excluded. And that's very important. That this is exclusion that leads to conflicts. And therefore, you are taken through a long process of deliberation and consultation, so much so this kind of conflicts are minimized. I say there would be the kind of situation as he mentioned, say in about 20% of the panchayat, but majority of the panchayats, no. They are able to, they have not developed what EMS called new development culture. You keep your political beliefs, you fight it out. But in constructing a local road, which everybody needs, why should you have political difference on that? So we accept the reality of political parties functioning at the law. We don't want to push it under the carpet. No, there are political parties and formations with the panchayats also. But the design of the planning process is such that you don't have sectarian style. You minimize that.
Perhaps there is one question here that Professor Franke could pitch in on. Rich Jensen has asked, what would you say are the best ways for people outside Kerala to learn about your methods and incorporate these in their own communities and practices?
That sounds like a kind of giveaway question.
No, Franke, the last paragraph of the book, you wrote that.
Yes.
The last paragraph of the book.
All right.
Yeah, that's what you wrote here.
Okay. We do not offer this account of the Kerala decentralization experiment as a model to be copied. We recognize both the arrogance and the futility of telling activists in other places to organize and struggle as people in Kerala have done. Kerala's achievements in decentralization, however fragile and incomplete, provide a sense of what is possible, an indication of how difficult true democratic decentralization will be, and an inspiration for those in other places who strive to bring meaningful people's empowerment and democracy to their portion of our highly unequal world. May those activists and organizers take what they can find useful from the Kerala experiment, and may they use what they take from Kerala in their nations and communities to fashion even better ideas and practices so that future studies will enrich us all far beyond what we could write in this book. So I guess that's the answer.
Indeed, I also found that the concluding paragraph was indeed very striking. Here is a question from Nitish Narayan. What were the achievements in regard to the participation of women and people of marginalized sections in both public life and planning following the People's Planning Campaign?
Well, women participation has improved both in number and quality. Though, as I told earlier, this meets a necessary condition for intervention to change the gender relations. Not sufficient condition, but that has been there. But in the marginalized sections, particularly tribals, we have found very much wanting. So we are doing some introspection. How the quality of participation of tribals in the process can be ensured. The problem is that, there is not a single panchayat where tribals are majority, except one. Now we have created one tribal village. This being the situation, you find their aspirations are not fully reflected or effectively implemented. So this is something we have got to address. So we have decided the general background development infrastructure, etc., should come from the general fund. We are going to use the funds which are reserved for tribals for micro level planning. Each family would have a plan. Okay, I've done that. That's why I'm saying it can be done. In my constituency, there are only 123 tribal families. Each family we made a micro plan. Participatory. Tell them what do you need to ensure that you have reach a fair standard of living. Some may need a job. Some others may have a chronically ill patient. Some may need a house, and so on and so forth. You make a list of what they want. Of course, then you have interactive way, prioritize it, and you have a micro plan ready, and you give that. So we are going to launch micro planning in Kerala to ensure, to eradicate absolute poverty, something that China, in the 100 years of the Communist Party of China, they have achieved. We have set the target. In the next 5 years, we shall eradicate absolute poverty in Kerala. And that will be our response to the question you raised, what has happened to marginalized section? Yes, there are problems, and this is our response.
Yes, that's a very ambitious statement. On that note, there is another question from Devi Vijay. Where or how does the large migrant labor force in Kerala feature in these deliberative spaces?
Well, they don't participate. They're outside. But now we are encouraging every local government to have a kind of assembly of the migrants from the village online. Suddenly, COVID has opened up these possibilities. So in fact, that is in the agenda, that every village will discuss with their migrants what they would require when they return, what support and so on. Two, how they could contribute to the development of the village. So this is a program that we'll be taking up during the next year. I mean, current year it has started, but COVID has been playing a lot of problem. All attention is on COVID, but this is in the agenda. We have already created an institution. It's called non-resident Lok Sabha. Representatives of non-residents from every country would assemble once a year with the participation of elected representatives, all the MLAs and MPs, and discuss their problems as well as problems of the country. Now we are taking one step further down, that every village will have such an assembly.
Just to clarify for the sake of the viewers, there is a large migrant population of workers from other Indian states in Kerala? That's what we were discussing right now.
That also you are asking. Very well. Local governments are involved more than the state governments, because state government can make only a framework. So in providing them shelter, healthcare, local governments are actively involved now. And now this relationship started with COVID. Somebody had to take care of them. And COVID, you cannot escape by keeping yourself away. Everybody is in it, yeah. And therefore, this has been, the background in which local governments have started intervening in the migrant population living among them. And I think it's very important. While they are in Kerala, their welfare is taken care of. There should be a significant difference between Kerala and other states. The migrants should be given security and their welfare assured. These are on this discussion. I am not saying this has been done, but this is something that we are committed to.
But is it possible to have assemblies of migrant workers, just like we have?
Yeah. See, we have been trying to organize them under a welfare fund. So the welfare fund is for regulation. Most of the laws for regulation. Now welfare fund is purely for welfare. Their benefit, for a marginal payment, government gives money, and so under the welfare fund, I have myself addressed many assemblies for local people, local migrant workers, literacy programs, and so on. But I think it's a very good idea which has to be worked upon, that we have certain representative structure for migrant workers in Kerala.
Okay, that is very interesting. What language did you use to address them?
Well, somebody translated my Malayalam into Hindi. So I don't know Hindi, but there are a lot of people in Kerala who can speak in Hindi. So the literacy movement selected literacy workers who were proficient in Hindi, and they were employing them to, deploying them to interact with the migrant workers.
Perhaps I could ask Professor Franke regarding this. You know, he lives in a country full of migrants. So, how are these things, such things, addressed in the US, for example?
Which kinds of things are you referring to?
Migrants.
When it comes to migrant workers, do they get a voice?
So the United States has a very bad record in this regard, I think. Those who are coming across the border without papers are generally arrested, held, and many of them are sent back out of the country. So it's a completely different situation from what Isaac was talking about in terms of what the Kerala movement is doing.
Well, I think illegal migrants will be deported from India also. I mean,
oh, really?
But I mean, perhaps not as harshly. I mean, it depends on which state it is and where they are coming from.
Yeah.
So, yes. So,
but I'm not aware of any institutions of the kind that Isaac was just describing in the United States.
Okay, but not even for legal migrants, legally arriving immigrants.
You mean what kinds of services or?
No, is there any effort to organize them or something of that sort?
That's a very good question. I've never heard anyone talk about that before in the US. I think it's assumed that the migrants find their way into some sector of the economy. Some of them have family members here already from the home country, and they are merged into those families or assisted by those families. But as a policy of organizing migrants, that's a very interesting question.
Okay. We have a question from Kanishka Gunavardhana. How does People's Plan campaign engage individuals and organizations not aligned with or even opposed to the kind of left politics pursued by the CPIM in Kerala?
See, about 40% of the local governments in Kerala are controlled by opposition, parties in opposition to CPIM. And there's no discrimination whatsoever, because one basic principle of devolution has been, it must be based on objective criteria. There is absolutely no discretion to the government in fund devolution, deployment of staff, and so on and so forth. If government wants to do something, say, dismiss or has an action against the local government, there is an institution called ombudsman, and government has to apply to the ombudsman and get the permission of ombudsman to take the action. Yeah, this is the structure of decentralization that we have created in Kerala. And as I referred earlier, the design of the planning process is such nobody can be excluded. See, you don't have to be, okay, you are in the opposition, you're opposed to CPM, it's a CPM Panchayat. Well, still, you can go to your Grama Sabha. Now, Grama Sabha, also you are a small minority. What prevents you from intervening in your neighborhood here? See, this is what I call the democratic space. That is there. And who will control that, who dominate that, is a contested arena. The outcome of that political, that is not determined. That is left to democratic process to decide.
Okay, so we are reaching the end of our program. We are running out of time. But perhaps as a concluding question, there is this one from Pirate Kid Pro, the user. Perhaps both of you could respond to this question. How does the current plan fall into the long-term goal of achieving socialism? Or is that something completely separate from this?
Franke, would you like to respond first?
Sure.
Yeah, then I'll follow.
Okay. I think anything that empowers ordinary people is consistent with the overall goals of socialism. And I think that the high levels of participation that we see in people's planning are also consistent with the kind of vision of socialism, of people voluntarily sharing the earth's resources and democratically deciding how to employ them to improve the material standards of living, which has the effect on people's psyches of building up the feelings of cooperation. It doesn't end disputes, but it seems to me that almost anything other than a people's planning campaign could not be consistent with socialist goals. So the essential features of people's planning sound like characteristics of a future socialist society.
Well, I think it would be appropriate to close this dialogue with another quote from the book. Kerala PPC is thus part of a larger political vision. It provides a legacy for the construction of a better society. Any socialist society must build on the institutions bequeathed to it by pre-existing society. Indeed, a part of the reason for the excessive centralization and the accompanying authoritarianism that prevailed in the earlier socialist societies lay in the absence of any representative democratic institutions in these societies prior to the emergence of socialism, on which the latter could build its foundation. In that sense, the decentralization experiment, by empowering elected bodies at local level, puts life in a whole range of institutions on the basis of which future society can be built. And that's why we also look enthusiastically to the whole concept of the 21st century socialism, where decentralization would be a very, very important component.
It was such a pleasure talking to both of you, Comrade Isaac and Professor Franke. Before calling upon Lion for concluding remarks, let me just remind our viewers that who joined late, that Arya Rajendran, who was supposed to be our third speaker, could not join because she has been hospitalized. She has taken ill, and we wish her good health. So I'll hand it over to Lion for concluding remarks.
Thank you, Subin, for moderating this amazing discussion. I've learned so much from both of you, Dr. Isaac and Dr. Franke. This has been a fantastic conversation. So thank you both for your contributions and especially for your wonderful book, which I'll remind our viewers, you can find this book either at Leftword, Mayday Bookstore, or leftwordbooks.com if you're on the Eastern Hemisphere, or 1804books.com if you are on the Western Hemisphere. So please, if you haven't received this book yet, please check it out. And thank you to all our viewers. We are so happy that you could join us, and we will have many more collaborations coming to you soon from both Leftword Books and 1804 Books. So thank you all again. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day or your evening from wherever you are tuning in, and we will see you all soon.